When my kids were little, when we first moved onto our property, there was a lot of tansy ragwort all over the pasture. And it's a noxious weed. It's harmful for horses and cattle, some of their livestock, and plus it's just illegal to have it on your property, although it's not enforced. So in those early days, I paid my children to go out and pull tansy. And there's some question as to how much I paid them. I think it may have got as high as a nickel, but anyway, there's some people say it was less. But anyway, so my grandkids are here, and I sent them out in the pasture to earn some money, and I paid them $0.25 a plant. And so Julie was there, and she said, "You're giving them $0.25 a plant?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "I think I'm going to go pull tansy. I'm going to earn some money." And I said, "Fine, you get a nickel." And she goes, "What?" And I said, "They're grandkids." So there is something in us that wants justice, that wants life to be fair, right? In fact, if you're a parent, I'm sure you've heard this phrase, "That's not fair." And our response is, "Life's not fair." But we want it to be fair. What are you talking about? We want it to be fair. In fact, I find it really irritating in a movie when the bad guys win. I did not like Braveheart. I'm sorry. I enjoyed the movie, and then it comes to the end. I went, "What?" I hate that. I hate it when the bad people win. I want movies to be the way I want life to be. I don't want them to be like life. I don't go to the movies to experience life. I experience life. I go to the movie to get away from life and where everything's fair. There's this huge sense of justice in my heart. In fact, if nothing else matters and there's two teams playing whatever sport, I always root for the one that hasn't won as much. Because I want them to, I want it to be equal. I want everybody to win the same amount. What is it about us that has this desire for justice? Well, I believe that thread of desire for justice comes out of the character and nature of God, and that we were created in His image, and it's one component, it's one facet of love. When you love people, you want them to all have the same joy, the same experiences, the same pleasures in life. And so I think justice grows right out of that. And it's all over through the scriptures. Let me just take you to a few passages and talk to you and read to you what God says about justice, because it's incredibly important to God. And I'm just going to randomly choose a few, but they are just all over from the very beginning. In Isaiah, the first chapter, it says this: "Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead for the cause of the widow." And then in Zechariah, chapter 22, it says, "This is what the Lord says, do what is just and right, rescue from the hand of the oppressor, the one who has been robbed, do not wrong or do no wrong or violence to the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place." Then I'm going to jump to the New Testament. In Luke, Jesus is talking to the religious leaders, and he said, "You foolish people, did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? But now as for what is inside you, be generous to the poor, and everything will be clean for you. Woe to you, Pharisees, because you give God 1/10 of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should practice the latter without letting the former undone." And then in John's epistle, 1 John chapter 3, he says, "If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and with truth. So the essence of God's message to us, the essence of God's love, is that he wants to rescue those people who are poor, who are homeless, who are displaced, who are refugees, who are out of their comfort zone. Some months ago, we had kind of a random encounter with a young couple, and they had a small child, and they were from the Bremerton area, and they were over here for some business reasons, and they didn't complete what they had to do, and so they couldn't drive back. They didn't have enough money to drive back to Bremerton and come back the next day, so they were just going to camp around somewhere. And so I was talking to them. I said, well, where are you going to stay? They said, well, I guess we'll just have to stay in our car because we don't have any money. So, we kind of looked at each other, and ultimately we ended up inviting them into our house and stayed in our house. And we didn't know these people. We thought, wow, we don't really know what's going to happen with this, but they have a baby, so that was the kicker. And so they spent the night with us, and the next morning we had breakfast together and prayed a blessing on them. And as they were leaving, we just both felt this incredible joy at being able to house these refugees, in a sense, these homeless people, these people without a place to sleep. And I remember we were having this conversation, why is it so hard for that not to happen all the time? What is it that makes it so difficult to do those sorts of things? It wasn't a huge effort on our part, but it meant so much to them. And they were just so incredibly impressed that strangers would really welcome them into their home. But why is it so difficult so much of the time? Well, let me make some observations to you about it all. I think, first of all, it's just really overwhelming. One of my practices in the morning is to get up and I start looking around at what's going on in the world. And I check sites literally all over the world as to what's happening there, because you can't just check sites in the United States because all you get is this tiny little view of the world. And so I go to some places that maybe even are controversial because I want to know what their perspective is on what kinds of things they're talking about. And, as that information starts coming in from other places in the world, there are lots of stories that we never hear about things that are happening, and it can be just incredibly overwhelming. And as I pour out my heart to God about all these things that are happening, it just seems so overwhelming. And it's very easy to think, wow, there's just so much pain and suffering. I just don't feel like my little bit here could possibly make a dent. And you just think, even if I gave everything I had, all my resources, sold my house, everything, it would barely make a scratch. So it's just overwhelming. Just overwhelming. It's also extremely complicated. At the time the scriptures were written, people lived in their communities. They lived in their families, and they were small groups. And so if you became a widow, for example, in a village in Nazareth, at the time of Christ, you basically had no income. There was no Social Security, there was no retirement. And so if you were a widow or if you were an orphan, there was no one literally to take care of you. And you literally had to go and beg for food if the community didn't respond. And the normal way that things were designed was for when those people were there, the community took care of them. It was their responsibility. So a lot of the message that Jesus is saying, or the Bible is saying, is instructing those communities, you need to take care of those people. Shame on you for not. And he's talking to the religious leaders, and they would actually set up situations to make it more difficult for the poor people to worship. So in that day and age, it was obvious who the poor people were. It was obvious who the widows and orphans were. And so you just simply had to say, yeah, I haven't really been taking very good care of them. I don't really like those people. Some of them are diseased, and I'm nervous about that, but I know exactly who they are. They're just right over there on the other side of that hill living in a cave, and I just simply need to go do that. So it was way less complicated. We have so many issues in our world today that honestly, there are some that really no one even has an answer for. I mean, like the homeless situation in Seattle. It's horrible. But no one really knows what to do about it. So it's complicated. The whole thing with immigration, I'm sure there's a huge difference of opinion here as to how we should respond, but it's complicated. How do we respond? And when it becomes so complicated, we just kind of, I don't know what to do. So it's easy to do nothing. So let me make some suggestions to you about how we can be better at this. First of all, I think you need to trust that God is in control of your life. And look at your past. Look at our past as a congregation. There have been so many amazing things that this tiny little church has done literally all over the world. And those things are amazing not because we thought of them, but because God opened doors. Randomly, offhanded remarks. The whole concert of Vimeo Place was something which happened just at a pastor's prayer meeting. Someone just threw out an idea. Say, hey, you know what? We have a lot of homeless people. What if we did this? And someone else said, that's maybe a good idea. We started praying and seeking God, and then doors started opening. People started appearing. Our whole involvement with Remember New was just a chance speaking engagement at a men's retreat. And I chatted with him and said, hey, what if we get together and have lunch? And we did. And from that, we continue to have a relationship with Remember New in Thailand, rescuing kids from the sex trade. Our firewood ministry, I honestly don't even remember how that started. But there are still people today that I get phone calls for. In fact, let me tell you two fascinating stories. I got one phone call from Covington Sewer. And they said, we're taking down some trees, and we understand you're the church that does the firewood. I said, yeah, we do. Can we bring you some firewood? And they brought us a dump truck on a couple of different occasions of firewood. Another call I got was from one of the elders of the Mormon church. And he said, I understand you're the church that does the firewood. I said, yeah, we are. So, we have an incredible past of God using our tiny little churches, our tiny little church, and our limited resources to impact people. We now have opened our doors to the Covington Preschool. And I don't know where that's going to lead, but it was so obvious that this was God providing another opportunity for us to minister to our community. Trust the past. Remember the past, and trust that God is going to provide you individually and us corporately with more opportunities to minister to people in our community and in our world. The other thing that tends to hinder us is that we are tired. Even as we get older, we become more and more weary. It's really easy to say, I'm just tired. But we need to be reminded that when Jesus gave these commands to his people, they were very tired. The first commands was very, very clear was when the children of Israel were leaving Egypt. They were wandering out into the wilderness for 40 years. They didn't know where their next meal came from. Every day was filled with dust and dirt and living in tents for 40 years. And during that time, God said, you need to remember the foreigners. When you have foreigners that stumble into your camp, you need to take care of them. You need to provide for them. You need to accept them as your family. During the time of Jesus, they were living under occupation. It was a miserable, hard time. Life was really difficult. And it was during that time that Jesus said, yeah, I know you're weary. In fact, he said, come to me, all you are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And you know what God says? One of the ways that he gives us rest is by loving other people. The very thing that we resist, reaching out and ministering to other people, is one of the things that God uses to provide us with rest, to provide us with healing. Because as you start loving other people, suddenly all those cares and worries that you have, they don't weigh on you nearly as much. Don't allow weariness to stop God from doing what he wants to do. Summer's a great time, I think, to sort of back off and look at your life and spend time in reflection, and hopefully you'll have a chance to get away, maybe even for an afternoon or a day or whatever. But schedules don't seem to be quite as busy during the summer, and it's a great time for us to stop and to say, God, I feel like in this area of my life, I need something fresh. I don't know what that means. Maybe it will be a ministry that will actually impact people in another country. There's some amazing things that are happening that you can research online where you can impact people in other countries right in your own home in some way. Maybe you're going to adopt a child. Today, we have refreshments provided by our youth because they are supporting a young man in Guatemala named Herbert. Maybe God wants you to do that. What if God asked everyone in our congregation to sponsor a child this year? We could all do that. I don't know if he's asking you to do that, but I think you need to at least ask God, is that how I can make an impact? And it's not about changing the world, it's about changing a person. Changing a person, which will change your life. Be open. Be determined that you're not going to allow your circumstances to prevent you from being a tool of God. And trust God to open doors, to open windows, to give you opportunities. Every morning say, God, is this the day that I will have the privilege of being able to love someone else? I want to conclude our service with a hymn, and then we're going to have communion together. So I'm going to invite Pam to come and lead us in another hymn.